Janine, you told me that when you started writing your book, you were 8 months pregnant. So what was that like, and how were you able to complete a book under those circumstances?
I definitely started writing it when I was 8 months pregnant. I did not finish it before I went into labor. And then obviously took a little bit of time off writing once the baby was born, but then kind of picked it up again at 4 months postpartum. So it was definitely interesting. There wasn't a ton going on in the world at that point because of the pandemic. But yeah, I still don't know if I would recommend that to anyone.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the Chartered Professional Accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. I'm Gordon Turtle, your host for this episode, and our guest today is Chartered Professional Accountant, financial educator, speaker, and author Janine Rogan. A member of the CPA Education Foundation Board of Directors, Janine is an enthusiastic advocate for education and equal access to educational opportunities. In recent years, Janine has emerged as a sought-after keynote speaker on a range of topics related to personal finances and achieving financial security. Much of her work focuses on helping women achieve their financial goals and overcoming the systemic obstacles women face when it comes to money. That focus is the theme of Janine's 2023 book, The Pink Tax: Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. The Pink Tax is an engrossing journey into the unique obstacles women face when it comes to money, and it offers insightful advice on how to overcome those obstacles. Since its publication, the book has received scores of positive shout-outs and reviews. One reviewer called it an absolute game changer, while another said it is required reading for any woman aiming to take control of her personal finances. So Janine is here today to talk about many of the topics covered in the Pink Tax and provide some insights for women seeking to establish financial security. By the way, we've got copies of Janine's book to give away to 5 listeners. Please be sure to listen to the end of this episode to find out how you can win one of 5 autographed copies of the Pink Tax. Thanks for joining us, Janine.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Well, it's great to have you here, and we've got so much to talk about. First off, congratulations on the success of your book, The Pink Tax. What led up to you deciding to write the book, and what kind of feedback have you gotten since it was published?
I think overall the feedback has been very, very positive. Of course, I think it has ruffled a few feathers, which I think is a good thing. I think if you're kind of challenging the status quo, there's always going to be people who maybe have something not so positive to say about it, but that's okay. I think that we're trying to kind of change the hearts and minds of people. In terms of what led me to writing the book, I think I always knew that I had a book in me. I've been in the personal finance space for 14 years now. And, I really wasn't sure if it was 1 or 2 books because there's so many books on personal finance in terms of this is how you build a budget. This is how you invest. This is how you do X, Y, and Z. But I really felt like for women, those things don't exist in a vacuum. And about 5 or 6 years ago, what I felt in the personal finance community was a lot of people were saying women didn't have as much money or weren't paid as much because they didn't work as hard, or they bought too many pairs of expensive shoes or handbags, or avocado toast was why my generation can't buy houses. And I just kept thinking to myself, that cannot be it, because if that was it, we would have figured it out by now. And so that, I think, is really what led to the motivation to dive into the research to understand what systems we were actually kind of playing in and the rules of those systems and how they actually impacted women's ability to build wealth.
So, when I read through the book, one thing that struck me about it was, the voice, the author's voice is so, honest and authentic. And I think that's in part because you share some of your own experiences and mishaps and all when you were growing up and learning about money. So what was it like to talk about your journey in such an open way throughout the book?
It was definitely interesting. I think as CPAs, especially kind of going through the firms and through the CPA training, we're kind of trained in a way to be very factual and be very, very matter of fact and not have a ton of emotion in our writing. And that was definitely an interesting experience. I remember my editor, coming back and saying like, hey, you need to like share a story here, or we need to write this in a way that maybe paints more of a picture. So I would say a lot of my editing notes were actually write more and explain it more in depth, as opposed to maybe a lot of my CPA training, especially when you go through the CPA program. It's you have limited time to write this, get to the point quickly, make your arguments on either side, and then come to a conclusion. So I definitely had to write in a different way than I would in the workforce, which was very interesting.
So did you have to keep telling yourself, don't be so impersonal, tell a few stories, open up a bit?
Yeah, don't write like a traditional CPA.
Yeah. So the title is intriguing, the pink tax. What does that term mean, the pink tax?
So the pink tax was a term that was coined actually in the 90s, and the definition that as it currently stands is the gendered pricing difference between items. So walk into any store, Shoppers Drug Mart, go to the pharmacy section of your grocery store, and you'll see that the men's products compared to the women's products are different prices. So razors, shampoo, all of those things. And if they're the same price, what you'll often notice actually is the women's product has less volume, so less ounces or less milliliters than the men's product. And oftentimes these are exactly the same. And I've seen this extend into clothing. I've seen it in kids' helmets. I've seen it across the board. And over the course of a woman's life, it really adds up. And this statistic actually came out after my book, which is unfortunate because I would have loved to include it. But there was a study done out of California that showed it costs women $180,000 over the course of their lifetime just in those little pricing discrepancies that we don't even notice.
Wow, that's incredible. You know, I just heard an interview recently with a woman who wrote a book about pockets in clothing.
Oh my God, don't get me started.
You've heard about this?
Yes.
So even women's clothing, the pockets are smaller, even on jeans and so on, that are otherwise identical to men's.
Totally. Or we don't even have pockets. When my baby was one, I have a little boy. He had pockets on his clothes and I didn't. And I was like, what is this 1-year-old going to do with pockets? And here I am, and I don't have pockets on a lot of my clothing. Or if you're correct, like on jeans and stuff, like I can't fit my phone in my pocket. It doesn't fit. So I will give it to my husband and be like, well, you're carrying this now.
So why do you think the pink tax exists? Is it some kind of systemic discrimination, or is there some like marketing reason for it? Or
yeah, I think the argument you'll hear on one side is like, well, it costs more to make things a different color. And I don't totally agree with that. I think it is systemic, but it's complex. So I think companies have been able to get away with it. Another great example is menstrual products. And there's actually a drug that is called, I think it's Aleve here in Canada, but the base of the product is naproxen, and that's the drug. And if you buy the Aleve or the naproxen that is marketed for menstrual cramps, it's more expensive, even though it's the same milligrams in it. But I think they've been able to get away with it as like a marketing ploy for a long time. But there's actually some interesting research that shows some of the taxes and tariffs when products are brought into the country are different for men's and women's products, and they're higher for women's products. So that would be at a government level that these things would be set. And then, of course, like in 2015, Canada said goodbye to GST on menstrual products. But the fact that we were even paying GST is supposed to be for, luxury goods. I think if you ask any woman, they're not going to say that it's a luxury to have to purchase those products. So I think it's very complex and nuanced, and it comes from a lot of different areas.
So in your book, I think one of the themes that emerges, and you mentioned this at the beginning, is what you call financial feminism. What does that term mean, and why is financial feminism so important?
To me, financial feminism really is just financial equality for all. And I think, that's going off of the feminism definition, which is, equality of the sexes. And what I really want to see is economic equality for women globally, which right now it's supposed to take 250 years to do that. So Hopefully we can speed that up, but I really want women to have the same opportunities as men, and I want women to have the same ability to enact change globally. And I think the world would be a better place if we made policy and made choices and decisions for kind of everybody to support everybody in society.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And I'd like to now get into, some of the details or specifics of the obstacles and biases that women face when it comes to financial matters. You mentioned several of these in the book, obviously, and there are a couple terms in there that I wanted to have you discuss and maybe talk about in terms of how they affect women. One was financial infidelity, and related to that was financial abuse. So can you talk about what those terms mean, and how can women overcome those types of obstacles?
For sure. And I think usually, and I'll be general here, those things tend to happen in relationships where it is a heterosexual relationship. Not to say it can't happen in other relationships, but when it comes to financial infidelity, it is one partner making choices or spending money and not telling the other partner or lying about it. And that can be really dangerous when it comes to situations where a woman has let the man in her life, well, again, we'll use a heterosexual couple, to make all the financial decisions. And so if he's lying to her, she may not know the financial situation that they're actually in. And I end up chatting with a lot of women who are kind of post-divorce, and they thought that their spouse had kind of set them up financially in a certain way. Turns out that that's not the case. And I think that can be really jarring because you've trusted that person to make those choices, but also why it's so important for women to be involved in their finances and to understand what's going on. And then when we talk about financial abuse, I think it is an important topic. And if anyone that's listening to this is in that situation, I definitely think it's something that you can bring up with your therapist. And another great thing is asking a friend to open a bank account for you. But really, financial abuse is a situation where, again, usually the woman is limited in her ability to make financial choices. So maybe the spouse gets a very small allowance every week and doesn't have access to the rest of the bank accounts, or is only given cash, or has a limit on what they're allowed to spend, or doesn't even have a debit card. I always come back to the Netflix series Maid. I'm not sure if you have watched it, but it's about this woman who is in a financially abusive situation, and her partner doesn't let her have a debit card. So she really can't escape that. He's also physically abusive in that show. And usually there are other levels of abuse when it comes to financial abuse. But financial abuse is one way that partners can control, again, usually the woman, so that they fall in line and make the decisions that the other partner wants them to make.
Yeah, well, it is about control, isn't it? And using money as a way to control someone and maybe keep them in the relationship, even if they don't want to be there. So that's interesting. I've heard stories where women will marry a man or get married, then a couple months later they find out he's got like $100,000 in credit card debt or whatever, and that can cause a lot of problems, obviously. Is that a form of financial infidelity as well?
Yeah, I think that's probably, would fall under the category of financial infidelity. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for talking about your money well before you get married and understanding where your spouse sits financially, because even if you don't have to take on that debt or you don't have to pay that debt back, that will impact the quality of life you have and your ability to make financial choices. If your spouse is always paying down debt and really focused on that, that's great. But if you're someone who doesn't have debt and wants to go on vacation, you might be in the situation where you either have to pay for them or go by yourself. And that could be really frustrating in a relationship as well. So it's so important to talk about money, but also for women to be involved in those financial decisions and choices.
So if a husband, a newlywed husband, and you mentioned it's usually the husbands who cause some of these issues, if a husband wants to be fair and open and trustworthy when it comes to the couple's money management, what advice do you have for that couple to achieve that level of equity and openness?
Yeah, I think you have to talk about money early and often. And so that, to me, kind of looks like honestly sometimes creating a little bit of like a money ritual. So maybe once a month or every couple of weeks you sit down with your spouse. And I really encourage couples to try and approach it from a perspective of like we're a team and we're trying to achieve common goals. So it's not about nitpicking like, oh, Gordon, you spent $12 at Shoppers Drug Mart, I don't know, buying something. Or, Janine, you spent so much money at Starbucks buying coffee. It's not about blame. It's about understanding kind of where the money has gone and then making sure that we're in alignment with what goals we have as a family unit. And I think approaching it from that perspective can kind of diffuse the tension, because a lot of times it can be tense, or if one spouse makes less than the other, I think sometimes there are challenges and obstacles to overcome there. But we also have to remember that monetary contributions are not the only contributions to relationships. So
Right.
Again, I am really an advocate of treating it like a family unit of money that is working towards common goals and making sure that both partners are in alignment with what those goals are and are, bought into working towards those goals.
So what do you think about joint bank accounts? Yes or no, or does it depend?
I think it depends. So like my husband and I, when we started dating and got married, we were quite young. And we were articling students, both of us. So we did not have a lot of money. And so we have joint bank accounts. I think maybe out of necessity of one of us was on study leave one summer, the other person was on study leave the next summer. But I think as you get older and more established in your career, it can be challenging to always join bank accounts. That being said, we obviously talk very openly about money. And I would still always advocate that you have your own bank account, even if it's not your primary bank account. I'm not against joint banking, but again, I think there need to be parameters set and conversations that have to happen frequently. And I think sometimes when you have just individual bank accounts, it can be really easy to not have those conversations. So if you do have individual bank accounts, I still think it's just as important to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. With a joint bank account, it compels you to speak openly about where money's going and how money's being spent and how it's being managed. So is there a downside to joint bank accounts for women?
I think it can be, like, obviously, if your partner doesn't give you, like, the login or those types of things or changes the password, like, that's extremely problematic. If your partner has, like, the ability to keep a bunch of money themselves because they're a higher earner and put that in a different bank account, that's problematic. I think sometimes when women have joint bank accounts, it sometimes will give them I don't want to say opportunity, but to be like, oh, well, he's handling it, so I don't actually need to be as involved. So I think that can be a potential downside.
Right. So you mentioned that much of your book was written during the COVID-19 pandemic, and your book notes that the pandemic affected women disproportionately. Can you expand on that? And are there lingering impacts from the pandemic that continue to affect women when it comes to their personal finances?
I'm like, how much time do you have, Gordon?
Oh, we've got lots. We've got lots.
Yeah. So obviously, anyone who had kids at the beginning of the pandemic knows that teachers should be paid at least $1 million per year, because trying to work and manage Zoom and school and children at home, especially if they're young, is truly impossible. And I can say that as a mom of a 3.5-year-old, there is no possible way I can get work done unless I'm putting him in front of the TV or a screen while he's at home. So that was definitely challenging for parents. And I think it predominantly fell to women to kind of bridge that gap. So we know that 1 in 5 women left the workforce due to the COVID pandemic, and predominantly that was around caregiving. So whether that was caregiving of children, but also there was a lot of elderly people that were needing assistance, or I guess families wanted to pull them out of homes that they were like retirement communities that were kind of locked down and they weren't really able to get any social connection, because that can also be really dangerous for them. So we know that 1 in 5 women left the workforce. The labor participation statistics went down to the same levels that we were at in 1980, which is really challenging. And then I think kind of as we've come back to work post-pandemic, I think, that big step back has impacted women's abilities to kind of move through the ranks within organizations and into the C-suite. But also, I'm not sure what you're seeing in Edmonton, but in Calgary, I think there has been a really big push to be kind of back in office, and not just back in office like a couple days a week. There's a lot of companies that want you back 5 days a week, and that's, to be honest, very anti-parent, and there's not a lot of flexibility around, oh, hey, like I'm a single parent, I need to drop my kid off and pick them up, and I don't really want them at daycare for 9-10 hours a day, because that's a lot for a little one as well. And I would say that those pickups and drop-offs tend to fall on women kind of more than they do men. So I think, that has also impacted kind of going back to, I'll use air quotes, but like normal, right? Like we're going to have networking events at 5 p.m. It's like, okay, well, my kid eats dinner at 5:30. Like I'm not coming to that.
Yeah.
And those are events where a lot of networking and promotions and relationships happen. So I think it has impacted women a lot. And I would say that it continues to impact women because organizations, unfortunately, I think have kind of started to go back to the way things were before COVID, which, to be honest, really wasn't working for women.
And so when it specifically comes to like money management, were there any impacts? Like obviously women's ability to earn money was affected if one in five left the workforce. Were there other impacts that you can think of, like related to their ability to earn money?
Yeah, so obviously if you're not in the workforce, it's really hard to earn money. But I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, there was a study done that showed it was under 10% of women that worked from home fully were promoted, and the number of men was like triple that. So I think even when there's like work from home, the men are still getting promoted faster than women. And obviously, if you're being promoted, that's another kind of area of the wage gap, right? If men and women aren't being promoted at equal rates, we see men kind of elevate into the C-suite and earn those high earning salaries and roles. And oftentimes those are the ones that come with the incredible benefits. And I would say, having been a mom, women are more likely to use those benefits, especially if they're going to be giving birth. There's a lot of things that happen to your body that you absolutely need, chiro or massage or physio or all of the things, prescriptions as a woman. So I think it kind of goes all the way up to the top. It's not just that they're not in the workforce, it's they're being promoted at slower rates, or they're not being taken as seriously because they're moms. There's the motherhood penalty that impacts women's abilities to earn when they come back to the workforce. And I think, this is where it gets so complex, is it is multifaceted, and it's not just a one solution to fix this problem. It is challenging.
Yeah, I'd heard that even, for the women that did stay in the workforce during the pandemic, their career advancement opportunities kind of stalled out, and that wasn't the case for men. And maybe it was this motherhood penalty that you mentioned, and but it is interesting that happened for sure. All right, so it doesn't sound like things have recovered for women then. Are those women who left the workforce, I guess generally speaking, are they looking to get back to work, or are they staying home? Are they?
Yeah, so I think in Canada, at the same time, there's this interesting kind of rollout of the National Daycare Initiative. And I think that is helping women get back to the workforce, because before, I think a lot of, especially once you have a second kid, a lot of women were saying, well, daycare is $4,000 a month for 2 kids. I don't even make that much money, so I'm going to stay home. I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it, because you're not taking into account your ability to grow and earn in your career, as well as benefits and retirement contributions you might miss out on. But also, I think men's salaries should be taken into account, because women are not the only parent. So I really do think that expenses should be split proportional to income when it comes to things like childcare. But we saw that starting to get rolled out, and it did start to lower the cost of childcare, which is good, because we definitely see more women back in the workforce. I think a lot of women also took that time to upskill and take courses and I think that has been really good for women
Yeah.
in coming back into the workforce. And I think a lot of them have come back to the workforce, but are now still facing all of the challenges that many parents have dealt with for decades, and not really seeing a ton of movement on, the flexibility of if your kid is sick, working from home. Or, I don't know, my kid's only 3.5, but I don't know how parents do summers where they have to sign their kids up for all these week-long camps because they're 7 and the parent has to work and the kid is home all summer and there's no childcare. And so I think that those things still, unfortunately, fall to women.
So when you were talking about the $10 a day daycare program, sounds like you have kind of mixed feelings about it. Like it's unrolling, you said, but maybe not working the way people thought it would.
Yeah, I don't think they thought it through when they implemented it in this province. And again, I don't live in any other province other than Alberta, so I really can only speak to that. But when they started to roll out these subsidies, they did not roll them out to private care. So day homes or nannies. And, we can have the conversation on whether or not we think nannies should be covered. But the real challenge was day homes. So all of the parents that saw, oh, wow, daycare is half the cost and it's going to be going down, flocked to those centers. And we didn't think through how much demand there would be for those things. So a lot of those day homes had to close, and it's usually women running them. So there goes their earning potential, because you can't run it if there's not enough kids. And then what we're seeing, at least in Calgary, is a lot of these daycare centers have wait lists that are 3 to 5 years long. The University of Calgary has a 400 family wait list to get into daycare. And not having care, I do not know how parents do that. Unless you have like a family member that's in the city that lives close that's willing to come watch your kid, I truly don't know how those families are doing it. But we didn't plan for the capacity. And I think not thinking that through has really impacted a lot of families, because after the fact they were like, oh, yeah, okay, day homes qualify too. But by that point, a lot of them had closed. Women might have moved on into getting a different role, etc. So I think that was really challenging. I think overall it is good, and we should continue to work towards affordable, accessible childcare, but it can't just be affordable. It has to be accessible too.
Boy, it's complicated, as I hear you speak about these things. There's so many factors that go into it that, someone without kids, or without small kids, you just don't think about anymore. So
Totally. And daycare hours are very limited in a lot of these centers as well. So, we're lucky that we both kind of work a traditional 9-to-5 job, but anyone who works outside of those hours, it's really challenging for childcare.
Yeah.
Like if you're, I can't imagine being a healthcare worker and working a 12-hour shift. Like, what do you do with your kid if you're a single parent?
Yeah.
Because the center's not open.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that seems like a good place to end part one. I can't believe how fast the time has gone, but it's been a fascinating discussion. And the good news is we're going to have you back for part 2, which is fantastic. So listeners, be sure to look for part 2 as Janine continues to share her unique and occasionally provocative perspectives on women and personal finances. For now, thank you, Janine, for being our guest. It's such a pleasant experience to talk with you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
If you would like to be entered into our contest to win a signed copy of Janine's book, The Pink Tax, just send us an email with your name and mailing address. Send your email to cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. That email address again is cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. Be sure to include the words "the pink tax" in the subject heading of your email, and to include your mailing address. 5 winners will be drawn at random from all entries. For you to be eligible to win, we need to receive your email no later than 4:30 p.m. on September 30th. The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshie CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.